Hello everyone and welcome to the British Birthing Stories podcast. Each week I'll be speaking with a different mother about her story of childbirth. Let's get into today's story. Hello, before we jump into today's amazing story, I wanted to ask a really quick favour if you guys would mind following, liking, subscribing on your podcast app. And do let any friends know who are expecting or you think might benefit from this. Or if you've got a friend who's got an amazing story that needs to be on there, please send them my way. In today's story, we're joined by Faye, who shares a really positive hospital birth. In her previous birth, she had a high intervention induction. So this time she really wanted a hands-off approach. She was hoping for a home birth, but sadly that didn't happen. But it didn't matter in the end because she had a really beautiful, positive physiological hospital birth. This is such a good one for any women out there that think they've had a high intervention birth and it's not going to be possible to have a physiological birth afterwards. It is possible, and Faye just details this so beautifully. So let's get into today's show. Hi, Faye. Thanks so much for coming on the show today. It's great to have you on.
You're very welcome. I've been looking forward to talking to you.
Lovely. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and who is in your family?
Yeah, so we've got my husband, and our eldest is 3.5, and our youngest is 6 months, just turned 6 months. And we have a dog as well, who is 5.
Great. And can you tell me a little bit about your journey to conceiving? Today we're going to speak about your second birth. It might be helpful to talk a little bit about how your first birth played out, because I'm sure that will come into it. But for now, can you tell us a little bit about what it was like in your journey to finding out you're pregnant?
Yeah, so the first time round, we were really lucky, to be honest. It was super straightforward, much more straightforward than we had anticipated, just purely through knowing people who had had struggles with conceiving. And so we kind of set our expectations that it would take a few months. But we were actually really lucky that the first time we tried, we got pregnant. So that was a bit of a shock, to be honest. And to get our head around, we weren't actually ready to tell people for a while, purely because it took some time for us to digest that had happened. But we were obviously over the moon and super happy about it. We were in Canada at the time. We were living in Canada, in Vancouver. So yeah, it was a challenge trying to keep it from everybody back home until we came home to see them, and then we told them in person, and everyone was surprised but very, very excited for us. So yeah, that time around we were super fortunate and pleased that it happened so fast. And then with conceiving my second, Etta, it took a little bit longer. And again, nothing, too difficult. I think it was 5 months in total it took. And yeah, and then eventually we kind of got the news that she was coming along, which we were super happy about as well. So in general, we've been really fortunate.
Oh, so lucky. What were your first signs of being pregnant with Etta then?
I was actually super tuned in with my body with both pregnancies and knew within a few days, which was I didn't expect. And weirdly, the biggest symptom I had for both pregnancies was my sense of smell going incredibly sensitive. So with Etta's pregnancy, we were actually renovating our house at the time, and I suddenly couldn't stand being in our kitchen because there was an old flue in there which was being patched up, and the smell of the smoke from that chimney, I just couldn't bear to be in the room. So I thought that's really strange because nothing's changed about that, and my husband couldn't smell it and nobody else could smell it, but I just couldn't stand the smell. And then I actually felt kind of cramping and twinging on one side of my abdomen, and thought, oh, I wonder if that could be the implantation, but kind of wasn't too sure. And yeah, and then just had this feeling that I could be pregnant. Took a test as soon as I possibly could, and actually earlier than I could. And obviously it was negative because it was too soon. But then bought one of the early detection kits, and there was the faintest line. And I remember showing my husband, and he was like, I don't know. But I think sometimes when you just feel it in your body, especially the second time round when you've been through it. So yeah, a couple of days afterwards, it was a very strong line. So yeah.
God, that's great. That's so great. Can you tell me a little bit about how the first few weeks of that pregnancy began for you? Did your symptoms develop quite quickly? How were you feeling emotionally? You waited a nice amount of time between the two. You said that Beau
Mhm.
had kind of just turned 3, so you must have been quite excited. And
Oh yeah, we were so excited. And I think that build up to um, trying for several months and not getting positive tests, when we finally did get the positive test, we were just over the moon and overjoyed. And I think when you know how brilliant having one child is, it makes you even more excited for the second one to come along and join the family. So we were just all extremely happy. We told Beau straight away, our eldest. He definitely couldn't comprehend what we were trying to tell him, but I think he got that we were excited about something. Um, and yeah, I just remember my symptoms in the first trimester being a lot of fatigue, just being very, very tired, to be honest, and feeling nauseous, but no sickness at all, which was a relief because the first pregnancy was really hard, with morning sickness until I was about 16 weeks. So, being sick every day for 16 weeks, and then the knock on effect that has on your body and feeling depleted,
yeah.
and then suffering from iron deficiency. I don't know if it was related or not, but the first pregnancy was definitely harder on my system, I would say, in those first few months.
Yeah.
And then the second pregnancy definitely felt like I kind of had this feeling my body knew what it was doing as it had done it before. And so it was a little bit less intense physically, which was great.
And so your first birth, you said ahead of this call that Beau was actually born in Canada. So you'd actually never given birth through the NHS system, and you're British, is that right? Yeah, you're British.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah, so it was two different experiences, and it was definitely an interesting time navigating the NHS the second time, because I think people assumed that I knew how everything worked because I already had a child, but it was all so different. And in Vancouver, you register with a birth program, which you get to choose, and you can sort of go around and visit a few and decide which care providers you want for your pregnancy and for your birth. And obviously, in the NHS, it's not quite that selective.
Mm.
But yeah, it was definitely a different process. But I was actually really impressed with the midwifery care during pregnancy in the UK. I felt like it was just the right amount of input that you need, especially in a second pregnancy. I know that it's less for second pregnancies than it is for the first. You get less appointments, but that kind of worked okay for me, to be honest, given that we were thankfully low risk. So yeah, I was really quite pleasantly surprised, to be honest, with the way that we were cared for from the get-go during the whole pregnancy.
Were you lucky enough to have continuity of care with your midwife, or did you have different midwives? How did that look?
Mostly, I had the same midwife for about the first 6 months, and then she actually went on maternity leave herself.
Mm.
So I ended up then being passed on to another midwife, who herself had, I think she had 6 children, 5 or 6 children herself, and had been a midwife for a long time. So I felt very safe in her hands, and she was very respectful of my choices as well. Um, and I never felt like she was sort of pushy or tried to put any of her own views onto me during the process. So yeah, we were happy that we just had the two midwives really that we saw during the pregnancy.
Yeah, that's great. It doesn't happen for a lot of people, so that's really great.
Mm-hmm.
What were your overarching birth plans? What was your hopes for your second birth? Because I know with your first, if you want to maybe just briefly touch on Beau's
Yeah.
birth, because I know that is quite influential in what you wanted second time round.
Yeah. So first time round, my pregnancy went on for 42 weeks, or would have been 42 weeks. Um, but the standard care in Vancouver is that you will be offered an induction from 41 weeks. So I took an induction on 41 weeks and 3 days, so 10 days after turning 40 weeks. And And then, it wasn't a negative birth in any sense of the word, but it was hard. And I think that was definitely influenced by the fact that I was induced. Now having been through um, a birth that was induced and a birth that wasn't induced, I kind of knew I would never try to put anybody off having an induction or say that it was a negative experience, because I think it was necessary and I was very ready to give birth by 41 weeks and 3 days, to be honest, with my first pregnancy, because the pregnancy itself was harder. Um, but it also then led to, I think, further interventions. So I was able to still have a vaginal birth with Beau, with my firstborn, but I had an epidural, and the labor was not enjoyable, I would say, up to the point of receiving the um, epidural. So the first few hours were fine, but it got intense very quickly, and I felt that I was further along than I actually was. And with his leading up to his birth, I don't know why, but I had a real thing in my head about not wanting to be turned away from the hospital, because everybody tells you, go at the very last minute. And so I stayed at home for as long as I possibly felt I could, and genuinely felt in my head that I was in active labor when we went to the hospital, and then had that crushing experience of getting there and told I was 2 centimeters dilated, which is pretty gutting.
Deflating.
Yeah, it's not a good feeling. So we actually wanted to avoid that whole situation. When do we go to the hospital, and what if we get turned away? Um, and so we decided that with Etta's birth, we wanted to try and do a home birth. So we spoke to the midwives quite early on about that to see if that was an option, because I couldn't find much information out about it, to be honest. I didn't know many people. We knew one person in the town who had had a home birth, but she used private midwives. So I didn't know anyone in the area that we live in who had been able to have a home birth on the NHS. So I spoke to the midwife about it, and she explained that there was a home birth service and that I was a good candidate for a home birth, having had a successful vaginal delivery before and being a low risk pregnancy. So we kind of went down that route from quite an early stage in the pregnancy. And then it was only towards the end of the pregnancy that we started to realize that the option of having a home birth wasn't as straightforward or available as we would have hoped. So it was very much dependent on the staffing levels at the time. And yeah, in those final few appointments, it became quite clear that it was very hit and miss whether they had an open home birth service or not. So so that was a bit of a shame, having, looked into home birth so intensely and prepared mentally for it for such a long time, to then realize that actually the whole thing may not happen. Was difficult. But actually, in reality, when it happened and we realized we had to go to the hospital, amazingly, we weren't too upset about it, I think, because we prepared ourselves in the final couple of weeks that it might not happen.
Yeah. I wanted to touch a little bit on how you started to feel coming into your first, second trimesters, and how you felt like maybe your pregnancy differed to Beau's. Were you carrying in the same way? Were you feeling good? Were there any different symptoms that maybe you didn't have with Beau?
So with Beau, I was, as I said, very depleted, extremely tired all the time. I just remember feeling bone tired. That's the only way I can describe it, is I cannot get out of bed. I cannot.
Dead.
Yeah, just nothing left to give. And that was without a toddler to care for. So it was, yeah, I just remember it totally knocking me sick how tired I was. And my iron levels were low, but not that low. And my midwives actually didn't even suggest having any kind of iron supplement, but I had seen a naturopathic doctor, in Vancouver, who'd said she really did strongly recommend taking something. So I got some more blood panels done, and eventually had an iron infusion, which I think helped massively. But yeah, I didn't experience that this second time around, which was honestly such a relief, because I don't know how I would have coped looking after a toddler and being that tired. Definitely still had some tiredness, but it didn't affect my work. I was still working full time at the time. And so, yeah, definitely had more energy second time round. But I would say probably more physical symptoms with the second pregnancy of pelvic pain.
Yeah.
So that probably came on around the 21, 22-week mark,
Yeah.
where I started to feel like when I was walking the dog, I would have a lot of pain in my pelvis and I'd have to walk quite slowly, and couldn't walk for long distances. So we actually ended up having to give our dog to my in-laws to look after for a little while, just to give my body a break from the walking.
Yeah.
So that was probably the main thing. However, I did see a osteopath about that, just a local osteopath we have in the town we live in.
Mm.
And she was fantastic in helping me sort of reframe the pain I was experiencing, and gave me some exercises, and explained to me how it can be all related to even your first pregnancy and how you've used your body since you've had your first baby, picking up toddlers and not breathing in the right ways after giving birth the first time. And so after just making some minor adjustments, that did actually make quite a difference in the pain I was experiencing. And actually, interestingly, the pain eased sort of the further into the third trimester I got, which I wasn't expecting, which might be because I was just less active and moving around less. Um, it was,
More sofa time.
yeah. Or I don't know if it's just, at that stage of pregnancy, your hips are really having to adjust and move. And then the final few
Loosening.
weeks, they're kind of already where they want to be. So
Mm.
it's less uncomfortable. I don't know.
So I know that you knew the gender with Bo, but what were you thinking this time round, second pregnancy?
Mm. We are not cool enough to be able to wait. It was never even a question that we would leave it to be a surprise. So we found out we were going to wait until I think it's a 20-week scan in the UK, that you get on the NHS. But at 16 weeks, I think I just had a tough week at work or something. So I booked myself a private scan as a little treat to find out the gender. And so we did that privately, and it was very sweet because we were able to bring Bo with us, and they lit the room up in the color. It's a bit gimmicky, really, but it was really sweet for Bo to kind of experience that with us, and find out alongside us. So yeah, we were super excited to find out that we were having a little girl.
Oh, because it's crazy, right? I don't think in the UK you're allowed to bring in your child when you have a scan in the NHS. Is that right?
Mm-hmm. Yes, yeah, you're not allowed to. So it must be a real struggle for some people to find childcare for those scans, especially if you're having to have more than the usual ones.
Oh yeah, I've turned up and been like, he can't come in. You're like, where should I put him?
Yeah, exactly. It's a bit silly, really.
So let's talk birth prep. You obviously were very keen to have a home birth, and at this early stages, you were still quite hopeful, right?
Yeah, yeah. We'd ordered the birth pool, so we'd privately rented that, and that came quite early. We did have a scan. I'm trying to remember how far along we were, but at one point we had a scan to check the position of my placenta, and at that scan they did a growth check, which we actually didn't know was going to happen, but they did it anyway, and they told us that the baby was measuring small. So we didn't really know what that meant, but we were told to come back later on in the pregnancy, I think 36 weeks, for another scan to check the growth. But we kind of had in our heads from that point on, oh, is there a possibility that they're going to want to induce us early if baby is not growing above, I think it's above the 10th centile is their marker. So we had the birth pool delivered and everything, but it was a bit of a strange time of not knowing, would we get this home birth because of that, or would we have to go into hospital for reasons because of the growth. But fortunately, when we went back for that second scan, they said that she was growing much bigger, and she was measuring, I think, more on the 25th centile. So it was just not even a consideration anymore at that point, which was a big relief. So yeah, we were still mentally preparing for the home birth, but it's a bit of a hard mental space to be in, to be going all in on preparing for that, and at the same time preparing to accept not being able to have that kind of on the day, which is a bit of a strange situation to be in.
Were you considering hypnobirthing, doulas, support like that?
So we had a doula with our first first birth, Bo. And to be honest, I think we are the only people to have had this experience. For everybody else I've spoken to who have had doulas at their birth, they found them incredibly helpful. But we didn't find it particularly helpful, to be honest. I think the vibe of the doula wasn't quite the right fit for what I needed during my labor. So we kind of came away from that feeling like if we have a home birth, then a doula might be helpful, but we would only have a home birth with midwives anyway, who I felt would be able to provide the support that I needed personally, alongside my husband. So we kind of ruled that out as an option. And I did do a fair bit of hypnobirthing. So I paid for the Pop That Mama birth box package, which she offers, and used it a lot, actually. Not so much for the sort of educational content, but more the recordings that she has on there are absolutely brilliant. And so I listened to those a lot during my pregnancy, and listened to them on repeat during labor as well. So I found that to be one of the most helpful things I did in terms of preparation. But also listening to birth stories, I found, to be helpful at a couple of points along the way in my actual labor, where I could have made different choices or gone down a different path. But because I had heard similar stories on Birth Stories before, Birth Stories podcasts, I made the decisions that I made, which I was really glad to have had that kind of context.
Yeah, that's so good. And it just shows that you really had that inner strength in yourself to know that you could do it, which we'll get into because I've already heard bits of your birth story, but others won't know it yet. But we'll carry on and talk a little bit more about your pregnancy. And were there any moments that really stood out to you, be it a challenge or a positivity thing that you could say to someone with a second time pregnancy that might be, struggling or something like that?
I think it's just to give yourself a bit of grace. I think sometimes in today's world with social media and things, there's a lot of pressure on mums specifically to go over and above every minute of the day for their children, which obviously we strive to do. But I think in pregnancy, it's really hard to divide your energy between a toddler that needs you all the time and a growing baby. So there were sort of things I had to tell myself along the way, that it's okay for, Bo to watch a little bit more TV than I would be happy with him doing, for instance. I think just giving yourself a bit of a break with a second, because it's really hard at points. Yeah. All I can really think of, to be honest.
Yeah, so let's get into the first signs of labor. What were your first symptoms or little niggles that you felt, something could be happening?
My waters broke.
You lucky thing.
So they actually broke before. I mean, I suppose there were subtle signs before then. So I was overdue again. I say overdue. I was 40. I was 41 weeks and 5 days. And I think that's just what my body does. I just have longer pregnancies. So I went to pregnancy yoga, And I was walking home, and I live at the top of a hill, and I was walking up the hill and I started to feel some cramps, but they weren't Braxton Hicks. They weren't sort of they didn't have any consistent pattern to them at all. It was just the first time I'd been desperately sort of seeking these twinges or any kind of sensation in my body that would tell me my body was going to do what it was supposed to do. And that's probably the first time I felt that. And then there was sort of nothing the next day. So I actually booked in a last minute massage for the day that I was due to be induced. Oh, sorry, the day before I was due to be induced. So I was due to be induced on the Thursday, and on the Wednesday I went for a massage, and the lady who did the massage was sort of specialist in all things pregnancy, which was very lucky. And she just said, I don't really believe in trying to induce labor through massage, but what I will do is just try and give you the most relaxing hour I possibly could, and we'll see what happens. So she did, and it was great. And then I came home and I had a nap, and then I went to the kitchen and was making myself a snack, and I felt some fluid down below. And my husband happened to be home at the time, and I said, either I've just wet myself or my waters have broke. And went into the bathroom and realized that it was definitely, my waters, which was exciting. It was definitely more of a trickle to begin with. So immediately I emailed my midwife to let her know, and asked if there was a home birth service running that day. She let me know that there was not, unfortunately, and asked me to check the color of the waters. So the first time I checked, they looked to be clear and fine. But I thought, I'll just go and check again. And I had put, a pad on, and I checked the pad, and it was just starting to look sort of straw colored, more like yellowy browny.
Yeah.
And then, so I gave it another 10 minutes, and I checked again, and it was even more sort of a darker yellow color. So I called the hospital and spoke to the midwife there, and she said to come in and have my waters checked. And then it was that immediate kind of realization of, oh, this is it. So we need to pack everything and put everything in the car, and imagine that we're not coming back potentially, which is obviously very different to what we had envisaged in our mind. But to be honest, I couldn't care less. I was so excited that this had happened by itself, and that my body had done what it was supposed to do, and that labor was starting, that I could have given birth anywhere and I just wouldn't have minded in that moment. I was over the moon, so excited, so happy. So we got in the car, went to the hospital, and then my waters just kept breaking more and more. Yeah, which is, it wasn't, that didn't happen the first time round, obviously. So I wasn't quite prepared for how much fluid there is when that happens. And then the midwife started to look a little bit concerned about the colour of them. So they checked me into labour ward, and then I was sort of advised that I should stay there for the rest of the labour. So I didn't actually have any contractions for the first couple of hours after my waters breaking, but I was kind of sitting there willing for them to come on by themselves, which they did. But yeah, quite slowly.
Yeah, so I just want to circle back for a second to where you mentioned you were provisionally booked in for induction. So you must have at the time, and obviously you didn't, which is great, but you must have been thinking at the time like, oh God, that's what I had with Beau, and all you wanted was a home birth. And then, so then you've gone into labour, right? Which is amazing. And you're at home. And then presumably you would have wanted to labour at home for as long as possible because all you wanted was a home birth, but then you've got the meconium. So then you're going straight to hospital. But as you say, was there anything going through your mind in those initial points? Or as you say, were you just stoked to be doing it?
I think the hypnobirthing really did help to just accept what was going to be. And I didn't want to waste any energy on being, upset about not getting, one type of labor, because I truly felt that my body would be able to do it no matter where I was. And it was just a matter of preparing myself mentally for that.
Yeah.
So yeah, it wasn't as devastating as I thought it would be. It was, and to be honest, one of the main things that I was worried about was transitioning to hospital at the wrong point. That was one of the things putting me off going to a hospital, because it's about a 25-minute drive from us. And I just didn't want to have to be doing the toing and froing, especially with having a child at home.
Yeah.
So that was the thing I was mainly worried about. And actually, because of the sequence of events, my water's going first and there being meconium in them, that kind of ruled that problem out. So I was in the hospital, and then I knew I would leave the hospital with my baby. So it kind of worked out for the best in a way. And I think I was, again, so relieved and happy that they were coming that I was actually kind of enjoying them for a few hours. And, they started off 20 minutes apart and gradually sort of started to get closer and closer together. But they were definitely taking their time with increasing. And I think that for me is just how natural labor looks, not necessarily. I think I always thought that labor would be, they start at 20 minutes and then they go, 17 minutes, 15 minutes, 12 minutes. But I think there is room for some variation in that. So they would get closer together, and then they would kind of start to space out a little bit more. And I would say that's the main thing that was difficult about having the CTG monitoring, is that the midwives and care providers are kind of quite fixated on looking at your contractions on the screen and wanting them to get closer and closer together, and kind of I think unwillingly applying a bit of pressure to you if they're not progressing as quickly as you would like. That was certainly my experience anyway. So luckily, the first midwife we had was very happy to kind of stay out of our way and just let us progress as my body wanted to. And luckily, the CTG monitoring was showing that baby was absolutely fine. I don't think there was any concern with her heart rate through the whole labor, fortunately. So that was kind of a nice, almost like a tool to have in our pocket when discussing with the doctors about whether we wanted any further intervention, was that, we knew that she was absolutely fine and she was progressing the way that she wanted to and doing it her own way.
And how did it feel walking into the hospital and that labor room? Because obviously you were so hoping for that home birth. Did you feel like, okay, this room's actually not so bad and I can make it work? Or were you looking around going, this isn't my bedroom?
No, I was actually so fine. I almost felt like it must have been the hormones, but I almost felt like on this natural high of just being so thrilled that my body was doing what it was supposed to do, because I hadn't experienced that the first time round. So I didn't know what it felt like to go into spontaneous labor. And I almost questioned whether my body could do it. So the fact that it was happening, everything kind of looked rose tinted to me, to be honest. I was quite happy with anything. We were really lucky. We got put in our own room as soon as we got put onto the labor ward, and it was a nice room, and there was a chair that pulled out into a recliner chair for Ollie, my husband. And we just kind of felt like we were on a little holiday. The closest you get to a holiday when
away from the toddler.
Yeah.
How did it feel then, having a contraction that I suppose that was natural and not I don't want to say like medicalized, but a little bit like with Bo, you'd obviously had an induction process, so they were quite intense, right?
Oh yeah, like chalk and cheese. So different, so different. So with Bo, they were just much more painful and harder to handle from the offset, and that could be because it was my first labor, but I think it was also because it was artificially induced. So I actually I started having contractions after having the Cervidil placed. So I hadn't had any drip like Syntocin or anything like that.
Gotcha.
But they still felt really intense and hard to handle. And and my cervix just wasn't opening. So it kind of felt like I was 8 centimeters, but actually my cervix was only 2. Whereas with Etta's labor, the contractions were much more manageable. And yeah, and they kind of came and went and came and went. And then I had a period of time where I wasn't having contractions for 10, 15 minutes, and then it would go back to 6 minutes. So it was less sort of routine, I guess, the way that it progressed. But I think that was easier on my body because it gave me a break in between the kind of sets of more intense contractions. And yeah, I used hypnobirthing. So I used those tracks from Poppy on the birth box. I had my earbuds in. So that was different because first time round I was playing music on a speaker, and my husband was much more part of the process. Whereas second time round, I definitely went more inward. And he sort of, he was in the room and he was present, but he wasn't participating as much. And I was kind of more in control of it myself, which I found more helpful, I guess. Yeah, I think first time round I was looking for external sort of sources to manage the pain and to help me cope. And when that wasn't helping, it was really frustrating. Whereas second time round, I think I had tried to make it come from me. So I was trying to give myself that comfort and make sure I had everything I needed. So those tracks really helped. I had some playlists that I'd put together for different stages of the labor, which also really helped. And I had some birth combs, which helped much more than I ever would have thought. I didn't really understand the point of them before this labor, to be honest. But I think just having something to grip onto and it not being another person, I just really enjoyed that.
So how did you find kind of movement throughout the labour in those early stages? Did you get checked early on? Did you want vaginal examinations, or were you hoping for more of a hands-off kind of approach?
I was curious to know how far along I was, but I also didn't want to introduce any unnecessary infection risk. So we were briefed by the first midwife that she said, the doctors are going to come in here and they're probably going to want to talk to you about induction because you have meconium in your waters, but just take their advice and take some time to think about it and then go back to them. And exactly what she said would happen. So they came in and spoke to me and explained the whole situation and what they would have wanted me to do, which was if there was no change in how my contractions were coming along in the next 4 hours, then they would think about giving me some synthetic oxytocin. And they wanted to check me. So the first doctor had said, why don't we do a vaginal examination and see how far along you are? But then it was actually the registrar that was with her said, why don't we give this examination a miss, given that her waters have already broken, and we'll do a check at the next in 4 hours when we've given you some time. And so I felt like that was a fair suggestion. So I think they hadn't checked me until midnight. So my waters went at about 2 p.m. and went to hospital. And yeah, I think I had my first vaginal examination at midnight. And at that point, I was feeling really good. I just felt like this rush of, I guess it was oxytocin, just really happy hormones and adrenaline as well. And I was really enjoying the contractions and just so excited that things were moving and happening. And then they checked me and told me I was 2 centimeters at midnight. And me and Ollie looked at each other in absolute disbelief because we both knew that at that point with my first labor, I was on my knees and begging for an epidural. So it was just a completely different experience. So yeah, I had that one check and then was quite happy with how I was progressing. So asked for another 4 hours, which they agreed to. And it kind of carried on like that in like 4-hour increments throughout the labor. And then at one point, the midwife changed. So I was given, I would say, more junior midwife.
Mm-hmm. For the first
Who,
bit.
so for the first bit, I had this experienced midwife who was fantastic and
Yeah.
told me that the doctors would come in and suggest potentially in being induced and that I should do my own research, which we did. And we actually listened to a couple of podcasts about meconium.
Yeah.
And
In the labor room?
in the labor room. Yeah,
So
we both
good.
took an earbud each and we listened to The Great Birth Rebellion. They
It's
have a whole
fantastic, yeah.
episode on Meconium. And so we listened to that, and then we felt much more informed to go back to the doctors and say, like, this is kind of what we're thinking. And because the meconium was fresh meconium and happened, as soon as my waters broke, we kind of felt like because her heart rate was okay and I was progressing and things were moving, that we were okay to keep going naturally. And I think having that knowledge that we'd gone away and looked into it and discussed it really helped with those conversations with the doctors, that they kind of knew that we weren't taking unnecessary risks and that we just felt that the best option was to leave her alone, really.
Yeah.
and let her come out at her own pace. So yeah, we had that conversation with the doctors a couple of times. And I had the first midwife who was really experienced and had had 5 children herself. And this is the midwife who gets given to all women who were hoping to have a home birth.
Yeah, fantastic.
And she was incredible and really set the tone, I think, for the rest of the labor. Sort of giving me permission to make my own choices and say thank you very much to the doctors, but then, go away and think about what's right for you. And then there was a shift change. I can't remember exactly when, but at some point during early labor, there was a shift change. And another midwife came on, and me and my husband both just felt that she didn't trust me as much as the first midwife and was much more hands-on and coming in and, saying things like, are you sure this is what you want? Are you sure you don't want the oxytocin and the synthetic oxytocin? And wanting to do more vaginal exams. And I don't know, there was just something about the demeanor that didn't sit as well with us. And I started to feel like she was questioning whether this was going to happen naturally. And then my contractions started petering off. So they started going back to more like 1 in 20 minutes, and they had been 1 in 6 minutes. And at that point, things started to get, I was starting to question myself whether this was going to happen and starting to prepare myself mentally that it might not continue to happen as naturally as I wanted, but still just had this faith in Etta that she was going to make her way out her own way. Sorry.
Faye, at what point, so you reached the 2 centimeter mark, and then at that point when you got checked and you were like, oh, okay, cool, we're happy with this. Then what was your progression like in terms of your dilation, and did you do anything differently at those moments for if anyone else is listening and they might be progressing slowly or kind of maybe not feeling like they're, moving as quickly as they'd like through the birth? Was there anything that you did that you found really, really helpful?
So I actually found that moving made me contract. I don't know if that's a common thing, but I found that if I was just sat down and not moving, the contractions weren't happening. Whereas if I got up and walked around or went to the toilet, every time I went to the toilet, I had a contraction and I had to walk down a corridor to get to the toilet. So I kind of figured, okay, well, when I walk or when I move my body, these contractions are coming on, which is a weird thing because they're painful and uncomfortable. So you kind of want to avoid that happening. instinctively, but actually the contractions happening is what you want to progress the labor along. So
Yeah.
um, I was sort of staying quite stationary for a while because the contractions were getting more and more uncomfortable. And then it was when um, the midwife came in, did another check. So this would have been at about 4 a.m. Um, and she said I was 4 centimeters, and she wanted me to be further along than that. I just remember her leaving the room and me and Ollie kind of going, let's just do everything we can in this moment. So we put the music on the speaker and we were like dancing in the labor room and just trying to get the contractions going. And I really had to kind of use my combs and grit my teeth and get through it. But tried to look at it in a positive light. And that seemed to work. And then they started to get a little bit closer together again and were more like 1 in 10. And we kind of continued like that. And then things get a little hazy. I think from about 6 a.m. When I guess I was transitioning more into active labor and it started to get much more challenging.
Yeah, so we spoke briefly ahead of this call about that moment in your birth where you were kind of you had that midwife that was perhaps not as supportive of whether or not you could perhaps deliver her vaginally, and you said that you were at maybe, what was it? Was it 4 or 5 centimeters?
Yeah.
Did you want to talk us through what happened next?
Yeah, so that was, I think, it's all very hazy, like the further on in the labor it goes, to be honest, my memory of it. But I remember there were about 3 vaginal checks and 3 times where the doctors came in to talk to me about what I wanted.
Mm-hmm.
First time I was really sure. Second time I was quite sure. Third time I started to get quite feel a lot more pressure.
Yeah.
That I needed to things needed to start moving a lot more. But at that point, I had started to contract much more frequently for about half an hour before that conversation. And my contractions were starting to get really uncomfortable, and I was starting to really, really want some sort of pain relief.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember asking the midwife, who was the one that I wasn't quite as on a
Keen
level
on.
with, yeah, keen on. I asked her for some pain relief and said, "Can I have some gas and air?" And she said no, because she said you need to be much further along than you are for this pain relief. And I was sort of like, "What? But there's gas and air right there. Can I just use it? And it'll kind of help me through this." And she was like, "Trust me, you just want to keep waiting. You're not." She kind of gave me the impression that I was still in really early labor.
Yeah.
But my body was telling me something very different, that things were really ramping up and starting to become more unbearable. So then the doctor came in again, and I have a very hazy memory of talking to her at that point about what our options were.
Mm.
And she had suggested giving the oxytocin drip. And when I talked about why, she said, because we don't want your labor to last very long, because there is a risk of Meconium aspiration syndrome, I think it's called, where the baby will inhale the meconium and it can make them very, very sick. But we had a conversation about, okay, well, what are the risks of that? If you do induce me, if you don't induce me, and if I have a C-section, and kind of what are the eventualities of each? And she said, well, it's kind of the same risk as, because it'll happen when she comes out that she'll inhale this meconium, and she could inhale it any of those 3 ways, whether we do a C-section or whether you have an induction or whether it happens naturally. But she also said that if we give you this synthetic oxytocin, it's kind of like putting your baby on a treadmill. And so her heart rate will increase.
Mm.
And if her heart rate increases, we have a very low bar for getting her out as soon as possible, which I interpreted to mean if we give you the synthetic oxytocin, her heart rate will increase and you will likely end up having an emergency C-section, which is not what I wanted. So we even talked about an elective C-section at that point, if she really felt that that was that my body was not going to progress in its own way. And I said, please, can you just give me another couple of hours because I feel like I can do this. And she said, that's up to you. If you want to make that decision, that's fine. I said, as long as she's reading okay on the CTG monitor, I'm happy for us to just keep going and seeing what happens, because this feels like it's ramping up for me and it's getting more intense. So if it had been completely flat and, my contractions had stopped altogether, I would have definitely thought differently, but it was still happening.
So did they check you at that stage? Your
So
cervix?
then after that conversation, after they'd said no to the pain relief, they then checked me and said I was 6 centimeters.
Okay, great.
So I was like, thank goodness for that. And the midwife who actually did that check was the first midwife who had come back on shift again.
Yeah.
So I had
who you
two
loved,
midwives
right?
who I loved. So she came back in. I felt kind of subconsciously was very relieved that she was back. She checked me. I remember her looking me in the eyes and saying, "You're doing amazing." And then she just said the number 6. And we were so happy that things were moving in the right direction. She left the room. And I want to say within half an hour, I transitioned to the end stage of labor, which was totally not what I had expected.
Wow.
Because I thought 6 centimeters, I've still got 4 to go. Like this is, if you go by how long I've been here, I've still got another few hours. But within half an hour, I was on my knees on the bed and screaming to my husband that I felt like pushing. And at this point, sorry. So when she told me I was 6, she immediately got me the gas and air. So I'd been on
thank the Lord.
Yeah. So I'd been on the gas and air for half an hour, and I don't know, but I feel like that relief gave my body like the go ahead to keep pushing through to the end.
How did you find the gas and air?
Amazing. Absolutely amazing. I don't know if it was actually taking away the pain or if it was that kind of crutch, like, okay, you've got something, there's something else that's going to get you through these next couple of hours, which are going to be even more intense than what you're feeling now. It kind of felt like, okay, well, I've got the gas and air, so I'm going to be okay.
What was your first sign of kind of thinking that you were in transition? Like you said that it happened so quickly. So you must have gone from like pain to, oh my God, this could be happening. What was that like?
I can't fully remember, to be honest, because I feel like you kind of feel like you're breaking through into another dimension when you get to that point and it all goes a bit hazy. But I just remember being desperate for some kind of relief. And I hadn't felt that the whole way through the labor up until about that point. So it was just a very immediate, almost like a panicking feeling of how I don't know how I'm going to do this. I'm using everything I have available to me. I'm using these combs. I'm using, hypnobirthing, and just it's all not helping now anymore. Like I need something else. So the gas and air definitely helped. I think just disassociate from that.
Yeah.
Kind of give you a bit more sense of control back. But so sorry.
What was Ollie doing at that stage? Was he helping much at all, or was he kind of sitting back and watching the show?
He was present. But interestingly, the first time round, I couldn't cope without him pushing on my lower back.
Yeah.
And if he left for any reason, I was screaming for him to come back with my first labor. Second labor, I actually was screaming for him to not touch me. I don't know why it was so different, but I just felt that I didn't want anyone's hands on me, that I was kind of, I think it goes back to, sorry, the very intrigued baby. So yeah, I think it goes back to that kind of wanting to find everything within myself to get through the labor rather than looking externally.
Yeah.
So I was quite happy for him to just be present and give me kind of words of encouragement, but not put his hands on me this time. So yeah, I just remember, I have a very strong memory of me screaming like, I need some more pain relief, and him looking at me saying, there's no time, this baby's coming, you're doing amazing, you got to this point, you just got to keep going. And at that point that was yeah, I think when you get to that mental realization of, oh, there's no turning back, this is happening.
So talk us through that pushing stage. Where were you in the room? How was all that?
So I was on the bed with the gas and air, over a birth ball. So it was like the birth ball and then a towel over the birth ball, and then I was leaning over it and the head of the bed was up. And I just remember this like internal feeling from my core that I needed to push. So I screamed to my husband, I'm feeling pushy. And then he screamed into the corridor, she's feeling pushy. And this was within half an hour of being told I was 6 centimeters. So the midwife came in and went, that was much quicker than I thought. She said, I knew you were getting there, but I didn't think it would be that quick. And then she examined me and was like, yeah, okay, we're ready to go. So it was just her and Ollie in the room. And yeah, and I just kind of let my body do what it wanted to do. And then there was, sorry for the background noises.
Oh, don't worry.
There was a point when the midwife actually said to me, I think the gas isn't helping you anymore, so maybe lay off the gas. And I think because it was helping me so much that my body wasn't pushing as hard as it should have been, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
So she sort of said, lay off the gas and just try without if you can. And actually the relief when you've gone through that intense stage of labor, the relief when you're no longer contracting and your body is just pushing is so, I didn't expect that. I thought people talk about the ring of fire and about, the pushing being the worst bit, but for me, it was the absolute best part of the whole labor. Just knowing that she was coming out, there was no more of these hours of contractions, and I just had to get her out. And I don't remember there being a ring of fire. I don't remember. I don't really remember a sensation of pain, to be honest. It was just intense hard work.
Did you feel like you knew how to push?
It was just, it was kind of like, when you're being sick, like if you're projectile vomiting, it was like that kind of
your body's
feeling.
like, ugh.
Yeah, like retching, but retching downwards, if that makes sense.
So do you think there was a bit of like fetal ejection reflex?
I think so. I mean, it really felt like I wasn't mentally active at all through the whole pushing stage. My body was definitely just, it was definitely a very different experience to pushing with an epidural. That's all I kind of know, was that when I was pushing with an epidural, it was very much coached pushing. Very much that like purple push as hard as you can with all of your body sort of feeling. Whereas, with Etty's birth, it was kind of like more from my core pushing downwards and less of an active experience, I suppose.
Yeah. How long did you push for?
I couldn't tell you, but I think it was about half an hour.
Not long then.
No. And I just remember like once her head was through, kind of hanging out for a little bit. And like my midwife was, I think my body actually stopped wanting to push for quite a while. And just had a bit of a moment to recoup some energy and then push the rest of her out.
And how did it feel when you saw her for the first time, when you held her? Did you have the rush of oxytocin?
Yeah. And actually, my husband recorded it, and you can see the rush, which is crazy. I'm so glad he recorded it, because the memory of that moment is so hazy that I wouldn't necessarily remember it being. I remember it being positive, but you can see in the video, like the look on my face is just like pure elation. And I was obviously exhausted, but just so happy that she'd arrived and she was okay. And
how was Etta and you when she came out? Was she all right?
So I don't remember this, because I guess I was on all fours and couldn't see her. But when she first came out, it did take her a little while to breathe.
Okay.
And you can see on the recording, the midwives are like checking her heart.
Yeah.
And she kind of came out, um, and just like not breathing or crying or
Okay.
coughing or anything. But then they kind of rubbed her down and checked her heart rate, and then she started moving and breathing.
Great.
And then you can hear the midwife on the audio saying that was a bit quicker than she would have liked, I think. So I think it must have been quite early. But then,
Shot out.
yeah. Yeah.
And what about yourself? Did you have any tearing?
I think she had a look and said there was a small graze, perineal graze. But she said it's not anything to do anything about. So, so they just kind of left us there and gave us some space. But then I think it was within about an hour of delivering her. My placenta came out naturally, and
Oh,
then
wow.
they left us. Yeah.
Quite
But
soon
then,
after, or
yeah, about 10 minutes after.
just came out? How was that process?
I don't really know. I was kind of in another place by that point and
Can't have been
just
that bad.
holding at her and looking at her. And they said, "Do you want the shot?" And I said, "I think we'll just see what happens and give it some time." And then within 10 minutes it came out, and that was all good. But then they left the room. We were just hanging out, and I was trying to latch her for the first time, and then I just started to feel really lightheaded, which was a feeling I recognized from my first labor when I passed out the first time I tried to get to the toilet after delivering Bo.
Oh, Faye.
So I thought, oh, I think something's not quite right. So rang the buzzer, and the midwives came in, and yeah, I was bleeding quite a bit.
Okay.
Yeah. But again, I think being in that post birth kind of phase helps a lot with that, because you're not really sure what's going on. So you do kind of look around at people's faces to try and pick up on, if it's something to worry about.
What happened next then? So you're bleeding, and what did they do?
They gave me the shot to stop the bleeding.
Mm-hmm.
I don't actually know what it is that they give you. Is it oxytocin again? Something to help the bleeding stop. And then the midwife came in, realized immediately she needed some help, went to get the ward manager to come and help. So there was then the two of them. And I just remember she was very to the point. She handed me the gas and air, and she said, "This is going to really, really hurt, but we need to get this blood out immediately, or this is not good news."
Okay.
And then they manually got the blood out. But to be honest, I was kind of trying not to pay attention to what they were doing, so don't really know how it happened. But I remember it being excruciatingly painful.
Were they kind of pushing down on your tummy, or were they actually trying to scoop?
Yeah, both. So there was one of them pushing and one of them scooping.
Gotcha. I feel like, and this might just be from other stories I've heard, but maybe to with the uterus not contracting back down as it should, or something like that. I mean, don't quote me.
Yeah, no, that sounds like it, because everything was fine up until that point, and then it was just like, there's a lot of blood happening here. And I just remember them weighing the paper that they'd used to mop up the blood.
Yeah.
To find out how much blood it was, and I think it was about 1.1 liters.
Okay. And did they give you anything for that?
No. Interestingly, they kind of just said, "Let's see how do you feel?" I said I felt okay, but just
not great.
like I've lost some blood. So just a little bit lightheaded. But they just said, "We'll just take some bloods later on and see if you need anything to help." But I guess my blood pressure was okay, so they were happy.
And how did you feel after experiencing that? Because you had this wonderful kind of natural birth, and then that happened. That's quite a shocking thing to have happened. Did you feel all right following it, or?
Yeah, I mean, it really hurt. It was quite a shock. But again, I guess those hormones really do their job, because I don't remember being traumatized by it or worried. at all. Wasn't even really thinking about it very much. I was very much just kind of over the moon that Etta had come out and that she was doing okay. But then it was later when they said, let's get you in the bath.
Yeah.
That I remember thinking, I don't think that's possible. I don't think I'm able to do that right now.
Yeah.
And I tried standing up and there was just no chance that I could stand up, I think from the blood loss.
And they didn't offer you any blood, like a transfusion then?
No.
I wonder what the
No, they
cutoff
kept me
is.
in overnight. So they checked my blood. I guess it would be, so I delivered her at 10 a.m. and I think later that evening they did a blood test and said my hemoglobin levels were okay. So they didn't feel the need to do anything. And then they checked them again the next day and said they were still fine.
Did you have iron tablets?
No.
So bizarre.
Yeah. I guess they just go by the blood test.
Mm.
Okay.
But surely you'd be looking at a woman that just laid a load of blood and can't stand up to have a shower or a bath and think she could probably do with a couple of iron tablets at the very least.
I know. Yeah, I know.
Look at the case in front of you.
Yeah.
So anyway, I'm not a medical professional, so I shouldn't really comment. But how did Etta go feeding, and how was that bond and connection?
Yeah, she latched, I think, within the first hour. And she did pretty well with her feeding from the offset. We did realize within a couple of days that she was very sicky. So she would be sick pretty much every time she fed. So we had to kind of, I had to figure out how much milk she could handle before she would bring it all back up again. Which meant often just cutting her feeds short so that she didn't have that reflux.
Yeah.
But yeah, she picked it up pretty quick, which was good.
And Beau, the first meet, how did he go with his little sister?
He was very excited. I think that was the first time he kind of cottoned on to what was happening, as much as you try and explain to them when you're pregnant that they're going to get a sister. I think until there's something concrete that they can see, they don't really understand what you mean, especially at the age he was, because he hadn't turned 3 yet at that point. So, yeah, he was kind of a bit bewildered and didn't really understand what was going on. But we bought him a present from her and let him kind of open it within the first hour of us getting home from the hospital. So that kind of gave him something positive to associate with.
And how did you find your postnatal care and support and all of that following your birth?
I remember it being sufficient. It was fine. I would say in the hospital, I think this is just a staffing issue, but I definitely could have done with a little bit more TLC myself after the bleed.
Yeah.
And just a bit more help with getting washed and dressed and things like that. I would say would have been nice. But the care was fine for both of us. But we were definitely ready to get home. Sorry, 1 minute.
Oh, good. We've got lovely Etta in the background. She's been so good. And Faye, how did you find your mental health, say day 4, and as you kind of came home, were you feeling all right in yourself?
Yeah, I think there was a few days of riding that high for sure.
Yeah.
From the birth, and yeah, I remember people warning me the first time that a few days after the birth you might feel really, really low. To be honest with me, that's happened a lot later than a few days after. It actually kind of happens for me a few weeks after the birth that I've felt a drop in mood.
Yeah.
Which I experienced with both births actually.
Yeah.
And being quite tearful, when the health visitor comes and does the 6-week check.
Okay.
Feeling quite tearful at that point.
Yeah.
But actually the couple of weeks after the birth, I've been okay with both, thankfully.
That's so good. How did you feel feeding went for her? So you found she was quite sicky. I know we spoke earlier before this call a little bit about her struggles with feeding. Do you want to touch on that just a little bit for others that might be going through a similar
Yeah.
thing?
Yeah. So she had reflux, and um I was kind of aware through my job. So I'm a speech and language therapist, but I treat children who have feeding issues. And I kind of had some awareness that she had reflux, but reflux is usually a symptom of something. Um, and the first line advice, if your baby has, significant reflux, is to try and cut out dairy and see if that makes any difference. So when she was 5 weeks old, we went to the GP, explained her symptoms, which was that she was very congested after feed. She would pretty much always be sick during or immediately after a feed. And the vomit was not, like a little bit of spit up. It was a huge amount of vomit. Um, and there was often sort of mucus mixed in with the vomit as well, which I thought that doesn't seem normal to me.
Mm-hmm.
To explain that to the GP, and um, they suggested cutting out dairy for 4 weeks and then seeing if her symptoms improved. And luckily they did. So I've stayed dairy free because I'm exclusively breastfeeding. I've stayed dairy free since then, essentially.
It's a
And
tough old slog with Christmas coming.
oh my goodness, the cheese and the chocolate. But yeah, it's made such a dramatic difference. So
Okay.
I'm really glad that we did that initial trial and that it was just the dairy, because I'm aware sometimes it can be a whole host of other allergies. But yeah, so she just has the standalone cow's milk protein allergy, which is quite simple to manage through not having any dairy, but it is another thing to have to sort of contend with when you're managing family life and newborn life.
And now that
Making sure
she's
you don't slip up.
weanings, what does that mean? Does that mean that she can't have dairy now with food?
Yeah, so you can do a milk challenge once you've been diagnosed. So that's where you give them something with dairy in it and just see if the symptoms return. I did that and she reacted. So at that point, they recommended I just stay off dairy until she's 1.
Yeah.
And so she can't have any dairy until she's 1. As long as I breastfeed her,
Okay.
I can't have any dairy until she's 1. So you just use substitutes. And yeah, and then when she's 1, she'll have a blood test to see what kind of allergy it is and sort of how severe it is, and then we'll take it from there.
Okay. Great. I want to kind of finish off this episode with one final question. And I think one of the most poignant things about your story is that I feel like you had a birth that you dealt really well with the fact that your birth was supposed to be as low intervention and hands off as it could be at home, right? And then it was kind of flipped on its head and you were suddenly having this potentially high intervention hospital birth. And then you had the added complexity of like that crisis of confidence where you didn't have a care provider that perhaps was aligned with you. And you seemed to be really resilient in the way that you held strong to your beliefs and then had an outcome that was so good and so right for you. What advice would you give to a woman that perhaps has had a birth like that and it didn't go their way, or would like to have your birth? What would you say to them to kind of channel it in that moment?
I think for me, the thing I kept coming back to was just to trust your intuition. And I think if at any point in that labor I had felt something's wrong here, which I know is so often the case for women who want to have that natural vaginal birth, but through, like reasons beyond their control, the positioning of the baby or, other things, they're just not progressing or things aren't happening how they want them to.
Yeah.
I think your body will usually know if something's not right.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's harder to know if something is right when you have sort of external opinions being put on you that you should be considering, other ways of getting your baby out. So that was the challenge for me in this labor, was to stay true to my intuition that things were okay.
Yeah.
And that things, sometimes you don't have to do anything for it to work out okay. That you can just hold fire and trust your gut. And I think it's not necessarily going totally against medical intervention. You know, that's definitely not aligned with how I feel. I have a lot of respect for hospital staff and the midwifery system and the maternity system. But also, you know, giving yourself some, what's the word?
Grace.
You know, you trusting yourself that you actually know you and your baby more than any person who's around you, who's never met you and never met your baby before will. So I think it's just trusting that gut, which sounds so, I don't know, airy-fairy, but I would say that's the main thing I kept coming back to. And the thing I was most proud of through the whole labor was just being able to turn down things which I felt would have actually worked against both me and Etta in the long term if we had accepted them and weren't actually necessary.
Yeah, that's so true. And I think what I've really felt listening to your story is like, and I've heard this in other podcasts as well, that just because you're only at, I say only at, but just because you're at, it took X amount of time to get to, you know, let's call it 4 centimeters, 5 centimeters dilation. It doesn't mean it's going to take that amount of time to reach full dilation, and you're the perfect case study for that.
And I think it's the thing that struck me the most afterwards was how your environment and the people around you and the way you perceive what's going on around you can impact the labor itself. And how, you know, if you're surrounded by people who trust and have faith in you and understand what you need in that moment, things will progress the way they should. But also, you know, the other side of that is when you start to feel doubt, how that can creep in and start to affect the progression of your labor. I mean, I don't know if I would have had those natural lulls regardless. But I just thought it was interesting the way that the timeline worked out. Was things progressed really well when I had the care provider in the room who trusted me and had faith in me, and kind of stalled a little bit when there was someone who wasn't so sure. So yeah, I think that's another kind of takeaway, is to stand up for what you think you need in those moments and make sure that the people who are around you are going to support the process that you want.
Oh, thank you, Faye. It's been so lovely to have you on. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
I really hope you enjoyed that episode, guys. And if you wouldn't mind, it would be amazing if you could follow, like, subscribe on your podcast app, and even leave us a review. I'm not really sure how all this works, but I'm told that all those things make such a difference. And if you have a birth story you'd like to share, or you know of someone who has a great birth story that you think would be great for the podcast, please do pass this on to them and any expecting friends. It's my hope that I can bring out 1 episode a week. And if I get way more stories through, then of course I'll try and do more. So the more I receive, the more I can give you guys. Thanks so much. And I'll bring you another episode next week.